ahead, and we're continuing in our time in Exodus, a literary reading of the central text of the Torah. This week, we are looking at the 10 words. Now, that's not a mistype. We will get there. The 10 words. That's what we're going to be focusing on today. But before we get there, I want to remind us where we left off. In Exodus chapter 14, verse 31, we see this. And Israel saw the great hand that the Lord had performed against Egypt, and the people feared the Lord, and they trusted in the Lord and Moses, his servant. Such a great way to end is like, yes, they're trusting, it's good, they're believing in God, and yet we all know that very shortly, they're not really going to be trusting that much. There's going to be murmurings, there's going to be issues, there's going to be going against God, and this is really what this whole thing has been about. Who are you going to abodah? Who are you going to serve? Who are you going to worship? Are you going to worship the God called Pharaoh, who isn't really a God but sees himself as a God? Or are you going to serve the God called Yahweh? I will be there howsoever I will be there. The God who is the one true God. Who are you going to serve? And if you go deeper into the Hebrew text, you'll start to note that there's two names that are primarily used for God all throughout the books of Moses, which are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And both of these names have different connotations. One of them that we're going to see is Elohim, which is usually the plural for just the generic word God, but it is a plural that tends to talk about justice. A God of justice who comes. And when you come with justice, you tend to come with judgment. And that's when we see Elohim. So if you're looking in the Hebrew and you get to Elohim, we're looking at the God of judgment who is coming, the God of justice who's going to bring that justice and bring that judgment. And then we also see Yahweh, which the Jewish people later on in their history chose not to say his name, so they said Hashem, which just means the name. I didn't bring this up the first week, but I'll bring it up now. They also have a name, Yehovah, or we say Jehovah. I haven't heard that before. That's actually not a real name of God. So let me explain that really quick. Yehovah is actually the consonants from Yahweh, but the vowel points from Adonai, which just means God. And what happened is the ancient writers would do that. They would take Yahweh, because originally there was only the consonants in the Hebrew text. Later, vowel points were added. When vowel points were added, the scribes started adding the vowel points from Adonai to Yahweh to tell the reader, don't say this word. That was the idea. Don't say this. Say Hashem instead. Without changing the text, they just changed the vowel points. The problem is Jerome came later on, and he translated, the name of God is Yehovah. And that's how we got to Jehovah and all those things. But really, it's Yahweh is the real name that's being used. So now what you'll hear a lot of times, example, Deuteronomy 6, you've heard me say it before, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Instead of saying Yahweh, they'll say Adonai. Sometimes they'll say Hashem. Sometimes they'll say Elohim. But they won't tend to say Yahweh. But Yahweh is the name for God that talks about him being a provider, him being the one of mercy, the one who is there for you. And we're going to see that a lot today as Israel is about to go into the wilderness. And they're going into the wilderness, this isn't the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. This is going into the wilderness to go to Mount Horeb or Mount Sinai, the place where God is, in order to receive those 10 words. And the question that we are left asking from what we just read is, can Israel obey God? That's the question. Will Israel obey God? Can they obey God? Is this going to work? Is this not going to work? And we talked last week, we looked at the song in Exodus chapter 15. Turn there with me. We're going to look at verse 22 at the end of the song. And it says this: And Moses made the Israelites journey onward from the Sea of Reeds, and they went out to the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days in the wilderness and did not find water. And they came to Marah, and could not drink water from Marah, for it was bitter. Therefore, its name called Marah. And the people murmured against Moses, saying, What shall we drink? And he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, and he flung it into the water, and the water turned sweet. There did he set him a statute and law, and there did he test him. And he said, if you really heed the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his eyes and hearken to his commandments and keep all his statutes, all the sickness that I put on Egypt I will not put on you, for I am the Lord your healer. Now, again, we just talked about how Yahweh is the provider. He's the mercy. He's the healer. This is the Yahweh. Whenever you see capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, that's Yahweh. And sometimes you'll see God, and you're seeing Elohim, and sometimes Adonai. But those are the names. But here what we see is they get into the wilderness, and they come across Mara. Does that sound familiar, church? Ruth, right? Naomi, my name means sweet, but no, call me Mara, call me bitter because of how I feel, right? So we're seeing the bitter waters here. All the way back in Exodus, this is where it began. This place, Mara, literally means to be bitter. And they see this bitter water, but look what God does. God provides. And look what they do here. This is very important. They murmur. The people murmured against Moses. Not against God, against Moses. And we're going to see this right now, where there's a struggle with the people, where they're really upset with God, but they're murmuring to Moses. All right? And we're going to see that a lot. And so what's happening here is they're murmuring, and what does the Lord do? Does he go, all right, I'm done with you? No. Remember what happens. When the wrath of the Lord flared against Moses, when he kept refusing, what did he do? He met Moses where he was at. And that's the same thing that we're seeing here. Israel murmurs against Moses and against God, and what does God do? He meets them where they're at. He goes, hey, fling this tree in there. It will turn sweet. I'm going to provide for you. I am your healer. And what does he warn them? If you heed the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his eyes and hearken to his commandments, his commands, and keep all his statutes, all the sickness that I put in Egypt, I will not put upon you. Do you see what happened there, church? Obedience. This is what we're going to start to see. And we're seeing that this God, the I will be there, howsoever I will be there, the Ehyeh, is there. He is there. And he's saying, I'm here, however I need to be here, because I love you. I'm your provider. I'm your healer. Let's go on to chapter 16, starting in verse 2. And all the community of Israelites murmured against Moses and against Aaron in the wilderness. It's like, goodness gracious, he just turned the water sweet, and you're murmuring again. Look what happens. And the Israelites said to them, would that we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, when we ate our fill of bread, for you have brought us out into the wilderness to bring death by famine on all this assembly. And the Lord said to Moses, look, I'm about to rain down bread for you from the heavens, and the people shall go out and gather each day's share on that day, so that I may test them whether they will go by my teaching or not. Look what happens here. The Lord's hand. Remember I told you to underline or circle or highlight hand? We see this all the time. What did we see before? It was always about Pharaoh's hand or the Lord's hand. And now what happens? What did the Lord's hand do? What happened under Pharaoh's hand? Under Pharaoh's hand, they were oppressed. But under God's hand, they were freed. And now what are they saying? Under God's hand, we will be oppressed. We will go through famine. We will die. Do you see? They're misunderstanding. They're misunderstanding who God is. Because this is the hand. The Lord's hand is the hand that brought them up out of the land of Egypt. This isn't a hand of hurt. This is a hand that brings protection and provision. Church, if you don't know this, protection and provision, to protect and to provide, that's love. It says in Ephesians, to nourish and to cherish, to protect and to provide. That's love. And God is the one who brings them love. His hand is that of love. And they're misunderstanding it. They're not getting it. But I love what he says there at the end. He says, so that I may test them, whether they will go by my teaching or not. Look at verse 6. And Moses said to Aaron with him and to the Israelites, at evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the Lord's glory as he hears your murmurings against the Lord. And as for us, what are we that you should murmur against us? See, Moses is now putting it into perspective. He's going, why are you're murmuring against God, not against me and Aaron? Why are you murmuring against us? You're murmuring against God. And guess what? There's something that's very important. He hears you. And he will respond to you. He hears your murmurings against him. He hears it, and he will respond to you. But here's the thing about God. Where there is protection and provision, there must be something else. Obedience. This is what God asks of his people. He asks for obedience. That's it. Unlike all the gods of Egypt and Pharaoh, who expected you to labor and to work and to toil and to be enslaved and go through all of this hardship, God protects and provides you if you obey. That's the idea. He is the loving hand. And here's the crazy thing about this obedience, though. Even in this obedience, he still is going to bless them even in their disobedience because of his love. And that's what we're going to see as we continue. Look at verse 10. And it happened, as Aaron was speaking to all the community of Israelites, that they turned toward the wilderness. And look, the Lord's glory appeared in the cloud. And the Lord said to Moses, saying, I have heard the murmurings of the Israelites. Speak to them, saying, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God. And it happened in the evening that the quail came up and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew on the ground of the camp, and the layer of dew lifted, and look, on the surface of the wilderness stuff, fine, flaky, fine as frost on the ground. And the Israelites saw, and they said to each other, Manhu, what is this? For they did not know what it was. Manhu, or what we say manna, or manna. But this manhu, this manna, this what is this, is literally what it translates as. What is this? Like that's what is this? This is sort of an anti-plague. Let me explain. This is meant to take you all the way back to the plagues before. What did God do? He infected everything, and it was everywhere. And that's what's happening here. This manhu is here, and we're going to continue further. I'll explain that a little bit more. Look at verse 16. This is the thing that the Lord charged. Gather from it each man according to what he must eat, an omer to a head, the number of persons among you, each man for those in his tent you shall take. And the Israelites did thus, and they gathered some more and some less. And they measured it by the omer. He who took more had no extra, and he who took less had no lack. Each according to what he must eat did they gather. And Moses said to them, let no man leave over from it till morning. But they did not heed Moses, and some men left over it till morning, and it bred worms and stank. And Moses was furious with them. Think about this for a second. I said an anti-plague because it's this provision that's being given to all of them. But look what happens. They end up creating a plague for themselves. Do you see what's happening? When you obey, you're going to have food. And when you disobey, it's going to stink like death. You're going to give yourself your own plague. If you disobey God, things will not go well. It will die. If you obey God, you will be provided for. Do you see what he's doing? This is what God's trying to teach them in the wilderness as they're on their way to Mount Horeb or Mount Sinai. He's trying to teach them that I'm the God that all I ask is that you obey. That's it. Just obey. Look at verse 25, chapter 16. And Moses said, eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, and on the seventh day the Sabbath. There will be none then. And it happened on the seventh day that some of the people went out to gather, and they found nothing. And the Lord said to Moses, how long do you refuse to keep my commands and my teachings? Sounds like God's getting a little fed up. But here's the thing. Look at what we just saw here. What is this trying to say? Like, we're talking about Sabbath, right? We're talking about Sabbath here. Think about this for a second. God is already sort of instructing them about Sabbath before he even gives the command. It's like he's sort of like trial testing it and going, you'll get used to this. I want you to take this Sabbath. God is going to give them life through their obedience, but he's going to give them death through their disobedience. And we see this Sabbath that he's trying to, that's one of the commands that we're going to read. He's already starting to teach them that. But more importantly, what does he say at the end? You refuse to keep. How long do you refuse to keep my commands and my teachings? He's saying this is super important. If you're really going to be my people, if you're really going to follow me, I need you to obey. You need to understand this importance right now. Look at chapter 17. Let's turn there, starting in verse 3. And the people thirsted for water there, and the people murmured against Moses. They're murmuring again, and said, why is it You brought us up from Egypt to bring death on me and my children and my livestock by thirst. And Moses called out to the Lord. Moses is finally fed up. Like, Moses is done with them. And look what he does. He calls out to the Lord saying, what shall I do with this people? Underline that. What shall I do with this people? Moses is now distancing himself from them. He's so upset. He's like, this people, not your people, not my people, this people. What shall I do with this people? Yet a little more, and they will stone me. And he's waiting for God to say, like, okay, well, have Aaron go talk to them, or I'll deal with it. But look what he says. And the Lord said to Moses, pass before the people. Go, Moses. Just go before them. But they're going to stone me. Just go before them. And what? Take what? Take with you some of Israel's elders, and the staff with you which you struck the Nile. Take in your hand and go. Look, I'm about to stand before you there on the rock in Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out from it, and the people will drink. And thus did Moses do before the eyes of the Israel's elders, and he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, testing and dispute, for the disputation of the Israelites, and for their testing the Lord, saying, is it the Lord in our midst or not? What are we seeing? Although Israel is murmuring, although Israel is disobeying, what do we see? God continues to meet the Israelites where they are at. I know, I sound like a broken record, but this is what's happening. We're seeing this repetition. This is how the Jews write. When they're trying to get a point across, they repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat to get you to understand this is the love of God. Whether you obey or disobey, he still blesses because of his love. However, the blessing that we're receiving is because we're seeing Yahweh. Oh, Elohim might show up. Justice might show up, and then they might not be like this. Do you see? There's that mercy, there's that patience and long-suffering, but at some point that patience and long-suffering comes to an end, and Elohim will come, and that justice will come. And the question is, did you change before the justice came? Just as when it came to Egypt, and they had 10 full plagues over weeks and weeks. And it's like, did you change by the time the judgment came? Did you change by the time that justice comes? Because obedience is important. Let's turn ahead to chapter 19. Turn ahead to chapter 19. Starting in the very first verse, first sentence. On the third new moon of the Israelites going out from Egypt, on this day did they come to the wilderness of Sinai. And they journeyed onward from Rephidim, and they came to the wilderness of Sinai. And Israel camped there over against the mountain. Look at verse 10, slide down a little bit. And the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. And they shall wash their cloaks, and they shall ready themselves for the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down before the eyes of all the people on Mount Sinai, and you shall set bounds for the people all around, saying, watch yourselves not to go up on the mountain or to touch its edge. Whoever touches the mountain is doomed to die. No hand shall touch him, but he shall surely be stoned or be shot. Whether beast or man, he shall not live. When the ram's horn blasts long, they it is who will go up the mountain. Really quick, we see something here that's very interesting. This, whosoever touches the mountain is doomed to die. Does that sound familiar? Doesn't it give you a little bit of creation vibes? The tree of knowledge, good and evil. Do you see? If you eat of it, you will surely die. If you touch it, you're doomed to die. It's not that God is upset or God is just saying you can't do this. It's God saying you need to be consecrated. I am holy. If you come to me unprepared, it's not that I'm mad that you're unprepared. It's that my holiness will burn out all the impurity and you'll die. You need to be pure, consecrated before me. He's asking them, are you prepared? Are you going to be prepared for this? Mount Sinai and Horeb, are you prepared? The tree of knowledge, all the way to, what is God going to do? He's going to descend on this mountain. Just as he did in creation when he was with man. But now there's this sin, this disobedience that's in the way. And if you go before God with a disobedient heart, with an unclean spirit, there's going to be a problem because God is holy. In fact, the priests had to do strict washings in the temple. And there's even a record of a priest who walked in, and they actually would tie ropes around their waists and around their ankles and bells on their cloaks to make sure they're still alive. And there was one who walked in who wasn't holy, and he died the second that he walked into the Holy of Holies. And they had to drag him out with the ropes because they can't go in. This is what happens when you don't come before God ready. And this is what we're going to talk about this in a couple weeks when we start looking at the Levitical law and we look at the purity law. This is what that's all about, being pure before God and how you can approach him in a proper manner. So let's continue to chapter 19, verse 16. And it happened on the third day, as it turned morning, that there was thunder and lightning and a heavy cloud on the mountain, and the sound of the ram's horn very strong, and all the people who were in the camp trembled. And Moses brought out the people toward God from the camp, and they stationed themselves at the bottom of the mountain, and Mount Sinai was all in smoke, because the Lord had come down on it in fire. And its smoke went up like the smoke from a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly, and the sound of the ram's horn grew stronger and stronger. Moses would speak, and God would answer him with voice. And the Lord came down on Mount Sinai to the mountaintop, and the Lord called Moses to the mountaintop, and Moses went up. Look at this. No one else can come and even touch the mountain, but Moses can go up, because Moses is clean. Moses has prepared himself. Moses is this prophet, this mouthpiece for God, this intermediary between God and man. And look what happens. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, warn the people, lest they break through to the Lord to see, and many of them perish. And the priests too, who come near to the Lord, they shall consecrate themselves, lest the Lord burst forth against them." He's saying they need to be clean. They need to be consecrated. They need to be ready like you are. Do not let them come. Warn them. But look what happens with Moses. And Moses said to the Lord, "The people will not be able to come up to Mount Sinai. For you yourself warned us, saying, set bounds on the mountain and consecrate." It's like Moses trusts the Israelites to obey God. Out of nowhere. Like, oh, you said that wouldn't happen. They'll believe you. It's like, Moses, have you not seen everything that's happened up to this point? No, they won't. And the Lord said to him, "Go down, and you shall come up, you and Aaron with you, and the priests and the people shall not break through or go up to the Lord, lest he burst forth against them." And Moses went down to the people and said it to them. We're all of a sudden seeing Moses has great faith in the people. Because Moses is looking at this going, I've been here before. I've been here. I've seen God in the burning bush. I've met with him. I've communed with him. We are now here. They will experience what I have experienced. We will now go forward in obedience. And he has that hope. But let's see what happens. We're now going to look at what we call the Decalogue. Now, many of you may know the Decalogue as the Ten Commandments. And this is because the King James Version called it the Ten Commandments. That was the first one to use that phrasing. However, when we look at the Hebrew, a better interpretation is the 10 sayings of God, or the 10 words. Commandments was something that was added later. And I think this is very important because one thing that we need to understand going in here is that the Jewish people have a different ordering and grouping of the 10 Commandments than you and I have read in our Bibles. If I asked you what's the first command or the first of the commandments, you would say, love the Lord your God with all your heart. No, a little louder. You shall have no other gods before me. Thank you. Someone was saying Shema over there. I was like, oh, okay, that's Deuteronomy 4:6. But no, you shall have no other gods before me. However, that's not the first word or saying of God. Look at Exodus chapter 20, starting in verse 1. This is the first saying. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slaves. The reason why we take the next sentence and make that number 1 is because this doesn't seem like a command. But this is the first word. This is the first saying. This is what the Israelites and the Jewish people hold to as the first word or saying of God. He is identifying who he is. These are all the words, not the commands, the words that God speaks. And what is he saying to them? I am the Lord your God, brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slaves. He's saying, I will be there, howsoever I will be there. I am Elohim, the God of justice. I am the Lord your God. I am the Yahweh your Elohim. I am your protector and provider, and I am your justice. I am the one who will be there for you. Remember, I will be there, howsoever I will be there. God will protect and provide. It all starts with, I'm the one who did this, no one else. But here's the thing. You have to obey. I will protect and provide for you. I will be your God. But you need to obey. When you obey, I will protect and provide for you because I'm also a God of justice. That's what he's trying to tell them. Which then leads us to the second command, which is a little bit longer. You shall have no other gods besides me. You shall make you no carved likeness and no image of what is in the heavens above, or what is on the earth below, or what is in the waters beneath the earth. You shall not bow down to them, and you shall not worship them, for I am the Lord your God, a jealous God, reckoning the crime of the fathers with sons, with the third generation and with the fourth, for my foes, and doing kindness to the 1,000th generation for my friends and for those who keep my commands. All right, let's unpack. Notice how that's classic expansion. I am the Lord your God, right, is the beginning. And then what? You shall have no other gods beside me. You shall make no carved images. It's one. It's this expansion. This is how the Jewish people see it. You shall have no you shall make no carved like this and no image. Now, this is actually really important to understand what's happening there. What are these carved likenesses and images? He's saying, of the heavens above, the earth below, the waters beneath. What is that reminding us of? Creation. Genesis. Remember we talked about this, the three realms that God is separating, bring tohu, order to, and then wobohu, creating inhabitants within. He's saying time and space, aka the heavens, the sea, and the land. He's saying, look what I'm doing. I'm creating this. Do not make any images of these things. Don't make any likenesses of these things. And you shall not worship them. What was that word? Abodah. You shall not worship them. You shall not serve them. You shall not work for them. You shall not labor for them. Because why? I am the Lord your God. He's reminding them of the first, saying, I brought you out of the land. They did not. Remember, they bled in the Nile. They died. I showed it to you. I revealed to you. I'm more powerful than all of them. But look what he says at the end. I'm a jealous God. Ooh. He's a jealous God. Reckoning the crime of fathers with sons, with the third generation and with the fourth, for my foes. And doing kindness to the 1,000th generation for my friends. And who are his friends? For those who keep my commands. You see what God's telling them? Obedience. If you don't obey, you're missing the point. You are not being my friends if you disobey. This is why Jesus says, if you love me, you will keep my commands. Now, when it comes to images and carved images and likenesses, a lot of us sometimes get a little lost and we go, oh, there shouldn't be any carved images. But the problem is when you look at the temple, the temple has lots of carved images. On the Ark of the Covenant, there's cherubim, right? There's carved images all throughout the temple of creation and of story. And everyone goes, oh my goodness, like they just broke it right there. It's like, no. What is he trying to say? He's not saying any carved image at all. He's saying any carved image that you worship. This is about monotheism. This is about serving God and God alone and not serving anything else. That's the point. And sometimes we get a little too hyper-literal with that. And then we say, well, you can't, like, if that's the case, any of you that have any type of wood carving of a duck to go hunting, you're in trouble, right? Like, but that's not the case, because I hope you're not worshiping it. But do you see what I'm saying? Like, that's the point. This is about monotheism. This is going back to that first command. I'm the Lord your God. I brought you out of Egypt. Now, you shall have no other gods before me. That's the key here. No other gods at all. No idols, nothing. Don't worship them. Don't serve them. They're fake. Don't look at them. Don't even make them. And we're actually going to talk about that when we get to the mercy seat, and we look at, when we get to the cherubim on the ark, and then the mercy seat, and how, I don't know if I want to go there yet, but what is the image that God gives? No image. Because God is not of this world. We're going to get into that next week. Let's look at the third one, verse 7. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not acquit whoever takes his name in vain. Again, this word to take in vain, we got to look at this, because a lot of us have mixed understandings of this. Now, church, don't hear me incorrectly. You should never misuse the name of God, okay? But this is talking specifically in the idea of anti-idolatry. That's the focus of this entire thing. In the form of anti-idolatry, it's saying, do not misuse God's name specifically within vows and oaths. I swear upon the Lord that I will do this, because if you misuse it, you're making it nothing, because you're lying. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, if you're lying about it, like, that's the point. It's saying don't misuse his name. A better understanding, the word for take really means to bear, and the word for vain means falsely. So it really is more of, you shall not bear the name of the Lord your God falsely. That's really what it's trying to say. It's talking about anti-idolatry and trying to get you to understand. Don't go make these oaths and these vows empty and take God's name into your lies, which we're going to talk about as well with bearing false witness, right? And this is what he's trying to say. Don't misuse it. Don't take it in vain. Don't take it empty. It is a hallowed name. And some people, unfortunately, take this and then say we should never say the name of the Lord, even though he said, this is my name for generations to come. But that's where that is. Let's look at the next one. We're at number 4, verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day to hallow it. Let me say that one more time. Remember the Sabbath day to hallow it. 6 days you shall work, and you shall do all your tasks, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall do no task. You and your son and your daughter, your male slave, your slave girl, and your beast, and your sojourner who is within your gates. For 6 days did the Lord make the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in it, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore did the Lord bless the Sabbath day and hallow it. The Sabbath day. Well, we just saw in chapter 16, like the Sabbath warm-ups, right? A little bit of a Sabbath warm-up deal. Here's the manhu, the manna. Like, gather on 6, don't do anything on the 7th, right? So they already have this warm-up, like, I'm sort of familiar with that. But here's the thing, and I've even preached this before, and you've probably heard this before, that the 10 Commandments are sort of lumped into 2 main things. We have the first 4 that talk about loving God, and the last 6 that talk about loving others. However, I'd make an argument that the 4th is really the turning point. It's both. Love God by keeping the Sabbath holy. But when you do that, you will love others, because look what you have to do. It's not just you doing no tasks. It's you, your son, your daughter, your male slave, your female slave. How much further? Your beast, the sojourner in your walls. You're giving rest to everyone. You're loving others by keeping the Sabbath, as well as loving God. It's this beautiful command, right? In, sort of in the middle of these two focuses, and this one sort of hits both. Keeping the Sabbath shows love to God through obedience, as well as loving others by giving rest in a world of chaos. But I love what he says there. For 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in it. So, church, I always say this. If you're ever talking to someone and they want to know, did God create the world in 6 literal days? Rather than going down that really tough argument of trying to, which it's very clear, but people like to argue the Genesis account, whether it was 6 days or not. It was. But they like to argue it. Take them here. God himself said it straight out. In 6 days, I did it. Argue that. Good luck. It's very clear. He says it right there to everyone. So now we switch over to the loving others, and we get to this lovely one that every adult in the room is waiting for. Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long on the soil that the Lord your God has given you. This is the only command with a promise. If you honor your father and mother, your days will be long. Your days will be long in the soil that the Lord your God has given you. Beautiful. Not easy though, right? Let's be honest. It's difficult. It's difficult. But now we're about to switch. Look at number 6. You shall not murder. Actually, in the Hebrew, it's just no murder. That's it. No murder. Not you shall not, just no murder. 2 words. No murder. Now, this is very key. This isn't no kill or you shall not kill. This is you shall not murder. Murder is killing, but killing is not necessarily murder. That's important. And that's what's happening here is it's this notion of this preemptive nature. Do not do this, and what usually happens out of malice or out of passion or out of desire. Do not preemptively do this. So for those of you who are wondering between killing and murder, it's specifically murder. The next one, you shall not commit adultery. It actually just says no adultery. Now, let's talk about this for a second because this is where it gets interesting. I went to Eastern University, and there was an article in the Waltonian, which is like the newspaper, and they have these opinion sides that where students and editors can write like their opinions, and usually there's a lot of faith stuff in there. And someone was making the point that nowhere in Scripture does it say that you can't have sex before you're married, and that do not commit adultery has nothing to do with that. Let's just say I wrote a very lengthy article to the editor saying, I cannot believe that you guys didn't fact check this, and I'm going to show you today what the fact check really is. There are 3 words in Hebrew for adultery. The first one here means lewdness, adultery, fornication, infidelity, and prostitution. The second one means adultery and prostitution. And the third one means offense, sin, trespass, infringement, contravention, and adultery. Now, the word that's used here is the first one. And that's very important. And the reason why I bring this up is the Hebrew language is one of the most restrictive languages there is in the sense that there's very few words. Ancient Hebrew has roughly 20 to 40,000 words. To put that in perspective, ancient Greek has 150,000. It has very few words, and therefore a lot of their words have multiple meanings because they don't have as many. And here, look at what this holds. Lewdness. What is lewdness? The quality of being very sexual or lustful in an offensive way. So that's covered here. Do not do that. Adultery. Voluntary sexual intercourse between a married person and a person who is not his or her spouse. Very clear. Fornication. Sexual intercourse between people not married to each other. That includes premarital sex. Continue. Infidelity. The action or state of being unfaithful to a spouse. Any level of unfaithfulness. Church, this is why Jesus says, if you look lustfully upon a woman, it's as if you've committed adultery. Because you are being what? Especially if you are married to a spouse and you look lustfully upon a woman, what are you? You're being unfaithful with your eyes. That's the point. And finally, prostitution, the practice or occupation of engaging in sexual activity with someone for payment. All of this is encompassed in no adultery in the 10 words, the 10 sayings of God. And this is why it's important for us to go back, because otherwise we just take that one definition and say that's what it's saying, but it's all of these definitions. It's much more encompassing. And that's why when Jesus says what he says, that he takes it a little bit further, because he's taking it to these boys, these teenage boys who aren't married yet. And they go, I can't even look lustfully. He goes, no, you can't. Because what are you doing? You're not fleeing from sin, you're flirting with it. You're trying to see how close you can get. Be like Joseph. Flee from sin. I think I've hit adultery enough, shall I? Move on? Yeah? Okay. Number 8. No steal. You shall not steal. This word here is actually very interesting. No steal. That is a good interpretation. But there's actually something else in here that's behind the word steal. If we're going to take it hyper literally of what this word means, it's more like no kidnap. Yeah, what? Now, it doesn't say that doesn't mean that that steal isn't part of it. That doesn't mean you can go steal people, all right? But it's really? But no, it's no kidnap, no steal. It's saying not just stealing of property, but stealing of that which is important to someone, is part of them or part of who they are. That's really what it's trying to get at. Like if you kidnap and you're taking something that is a part of that person's life. Like it's not just taking a loaf of bread, which is also part of this. It's including that depth to it. And by the way, back in this time, in the ancient time, kidnapping happened a lot. So that's why this is here and why it's said in this way. Do not steal, no kidnap. Verse 16, the 9th. You shall not bear false witness against your fellow man. This isn't just no lie. It's don't bear any false witness against your fellow man. No lying at all, especially when it comes to bearing false witness and testimony against someone else. It's very important. And you'll see why as we get to the 10th, the final, which is this. You shall not covet your fellow man's house. You shall not covet your fellow man's wife, or his male slave, or his slave girl, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that your fellow man has. Classic expansion right here, right? You shall not covet your fellow man's house. Okay. Well, when you say house, do you mean the building or things that are within it? Well, let's talk about that. What's inside it? Your fellow man's wife. Your fellow man's wife. Okay. His male slave. Okay. What else, God? His slave girl. Okay. What else? His ox. What else? His donkey. What else? All right. Anything that he has, right? It's like this constant expansion of what else? And he goes, here's just a few examples. Anything. But here's the thing about the Decalogue that's beautiful. All these negative sayings, 6 to 10, can be found in this last saying. Every single one of them. Think about it. If you read this in reverse and you start with, do not covet your fellow man's house. Well, if you don't covet your fellow man's house, you're probably not going to be bearing false witness against your fellow man. Because why would you be bearing false witness against your fellow man? Because there's a disagreement about something, possibly even about something he owns. Go back another one. Do not steal, kidnap. Well, if you don't covet what he has, you won't steal. Go back another. You shall not commit adultery. Well, if you don't covet his wife or his slave girl or whatever, you won't. Do you see this? It can be read the other way. Do not murder. Well, you have a disagreement, and what do we see with Cain and Abel? Right? Out of desire comes these things. Out of wrongful desire that's misplaced. And this is what God's trying to teach his people. I'm sort of putting a nice bow on it at the end saying this will cover all of it. If you get this right, all of those are pretty much covered. But that's the point. Which then leads us to verse 18. So after God says all of this from the mountain, his words, by the way, God speaking out loud, audibly to Israel. And look what happens. Verse 18. And all the people were seeing the thunder and the flashes and the sound of the ram's horn and the mountain and smoke. And the people saw and they drew back and stood at a distance. And they said to Moses, speak you with us that we may hear. And let not God speak with us lest we die. They're afraid. And look what Moses says. And Moses said to the people, do not fear, for in order to test you, God has come, and in order that his fear be upon you, so that you do not offend. And the people stood at a distance, and Moses drew near the thick cloud where God was. Look at what Moses just said there. Do not fear. But rather he came for what? So his fear may be upon you. Hold on a second. do not fear God, rather fear God? What? Like, what is he saying here? We got to go all the way back to Moses' interaction at the burning bush with God. When he goes to the burning bush, God cries out to him, Ayer, Asher, Ayer. I will be there howsoever I will be there. I am who I am. I will be what I will be. And remember, Moses is like, another God I can't know. But then God says, but I will be known for generations as Yahweh. He is. Moses, you can know me. I'm calling you to relationship with me. You can know me, and I will be there howsoever I will be there is not my way of getting out of telling you who I am. It's me telling you what I will do for you. And you will be in relationship, and you can say, he is love, he is joy, he is peace, he is God, because you will experience me. And I will be in intimate relationship with you. So Moses is saying, don't be terrified of God. Because there's two different Hebrew words happening here. He's saying, don't be terrified of God. Rather, fear God in awe. To be in awe of God is to be in fearful wonder. And this is what Moses is trying to get across to the people. Don't be terrified of him. Rather, have fearful wonder of who he is, because he wants you to know him. This is what Moses is trying to tell the people, but they don't get it, and they back away. So Moses steps into, at this point, finally fully steps into what God has called him to do. All the way back from the hesitation with the Egyptian, looking right, looking left, is anyone else going to do something, to finally stepping up and going, I am God's mouthpiece. I will approach the cloud. I will approach God, and I will speak his words to his people. I will prophesy. This is where he ends up. And then we end here in verse 22. And the Lord said to Moses, thus shall you say to the Israelites, you yourselves saw that from the heavens I spoke with you. You shall not make with me gods of silver and gods of gold. You shall not make them for yourselves. An earthen altar shall you make for me. You shall sacrifice upon it your burnt offerings and your communion sacrifices, your sheep and your cattle. In every place that I make my name invoked, I shall come to you and bless you. And should you make me an altar of stones, you shall not build them out of hewn stones, for your sword you would brandish over it and profane it. Let's talk about this really quick. What does he say? You shall not make with me gods of silver and gods of gold. Oh no, because we know exactly what's about to happen. Less than 40 days later, what are they going to do? Golden calf. And that's what we're going to see next week. He literally warned them. He warned them. He said, don't do it. That's like the second one. Like, don't do it. I'm the Lord your God. First one, I brought you out. Do not make any idols. Second one, and what are they going to do? They're not only going to make, this is the thing that we forget, they didn't just make an idol. They said, these are the gods that brought us out of Egypt. They broke the first two. And God's going, are you serious? You don't trust me. You don't obey me. You're missing who I am. But here's the other thing. He says about this altar and this sword, and we're like, what's the point of this? An altar gives you long days of life. Why? Because when you go to the altar, you're being obedient to God. When you are obedient, you will have long days of life. But with a sword, your life will shorten. That's the point. In Jewish imagery, sword is always that which takes life, that which cuts life in half, that which destroys life. And it's the focus of, I want you to come to the altar and be obedient, not to live by the sword, which will diminish your life. I want your life to be long. And I want you to be obedient.